Hey guys, tonight we're going underground. Not just a basement or a cellar. Deeper than that, we're descending into Derinkuyu, a city carved entirely beneath the surface of Turkey, where 20,000 people once lived in darkness. A place so vast that when it was finally discovered, historians had to rewrite what they thought they knew about ancient engineering. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where in the world you're drifting off tonight. The story begins in 1963 in a small village called Derinkuyu in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey. A man is renovating his house. Nothing unusual about that. He's knocking down a wall in his basement, probably thinking about storage space or maybe adding a wine cellar. His hammer breaks through, but instead of finding another room, he finds darkness. A tunnel. Not a modern tunnel. Not a sewer line or forgotten foundation. This tunnel is carved directly into the rock. Smooth walls. Intentional architecture. He grabs a flashlight and steps inside. The tunnel leads down. It opens into a room, then another room, then a staircase descending even further. He realizes he's standing inside something far older than his house, older than his village. He's found a doorway into the earth itself. Within days, archaeologists arrive. They begin mapping what they can reach. What they discover defies easy explanation. Beneath this ordinary Turkish village lies an underground city, 18 stories deep, reaching over 280 feet below the surface. The city isn't just a series of caves. It's organized, planned. There are rooms for sleeping, rooms for storage, rooms for animals. There are communal kitchens with ventilation shafts to carry smoke away. There are wells that drew water from deep aquifers. There are wine presses, chapels, schools, even graveyards. And strangest of all, there are massive stone doors, circular like millstones designed to roll shut and seal entire sections from the inside. The archaeologists estimate that Derinkuyu could shelter up to 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food stores. But the question that haunted everyone wasn't just how this city was built. It was why. What were they hiding from? The man who broke through his basement wall had no idea he was about to reopen one of history's most unsettling mysteries. Because Derinkuyu wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress, and it was designed to keep something or someone out. Historians have been arguing ever since about what kind of threat could drive an entire civilization to abandon the surface and live like moles beneath the Anatolian plateau. Some say it was invading armies. Others suggest religious persecution. A few fringe theories propose natural disasters, climate catastrophes, or even threats that sound more like science fiction than ancient history. But here's what we know for certain. Whoever built Derinkuyu spent generations carving it out. This wasn't a desperate, last-minute hiding spot. It was a long-term survival plan. The kind of project you only undertake if you believe the danger is real, persistent, and unavoidable. And it worked. The city was used repeatedly over centuries, occupied by different peoples at different times. Phrygians, Persians, Christians fleeing Roman persecution. Each group expanded it, modified it, added their own touches. But the original builders? We still don't know exactly who they were. The volcanic rock they carved into, called tuff, doesn't leave the kind of evidence that gives us clear dates. No inscriptions, no dedications, no grand announcements of who commissioned this impossible feat. Just silent stone and empty rooms waiting in the dark. When you stand at the entrance to Derinkuyu today, you're looking at a portal into a kind of fear we can barely imagine. The fear that made safety more important than sunlight. The fear that made isolation preferable to exposure. The fear that turned an entire community into architects of their own underground world. And here's the thing that makes it even stranger. Derinkuyu isn't unique. It's just the largest of more than 200 underground cities discovered in Cappadocia. Some of them are connected by tunnels stretching for miles beneath the earth. A whole network of hidden worlds, carved by hands we'll never know, for reasons we're still trying to understand. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we explore what drove them underground, we need to understand what they built. We need to walk through those tunnels ourselves, descend those staircases, and see what life was actually like in a city where the sun never reached. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You descend the first staircase. The stone is smooth under your feet, worn down by thousands of footsteps over centuries. The air is cool, not cold, but noticeably different from the surface heat of Cappadocia. It smells like earth and time. Your lamp flickers as you move deeper, and you realize something immediately. This isn't a cave system that someone stumbled upon and modified. Every surface here was carved with intention. The walls are too uniform. The ceilings too carefully vaulted. This is architecture, not geology. You're standing at the top level of 18 floors that descend over 280 feet into the earth. Think about that for a moment. An 18-story building, except instead of rising into the sky, it burrows down into volcanic rock. The deepest levels remain flooded and unexplored even today. Archaeologists have only mapped about half of what they believe exists down there. The rest waits in darkness and groundwater, keeping its secrets. As you move through the upper levels, you start to understand the logic of the layout. This wasn't random excavation. It was urban planning. Each level served specific purposes. The top floors, closest to the surface, were living quarters. Family rooms carved into the tuff with sleeping alcoves cut into the walls. You can still see the grooves where wooden shelves once rested. Some rooms have small niches carved at shoulder height, places for oil lamps. The stone around these niches is darkened by centuries of soot. Further down, you find communal spaces, large rooms that could hold dozens of people. Meeting halls, perhaps, or dining areas. One chamber contains a wine press, a massive carved basin where grapes were crushed, with channels cut into the floor to direct the juice into collection vessels. The fact that they bothered to make wine down here tells you something important. They weren't just surviving, they were living. Deeper still, you discover kitchens. These are easier to identify because of the ventilation shafts. Narrow chimneys carved vertically through multiple levels to carry smoke up and out. Imagine the engineering required to ensure that smoke from a cooking fire 18 stories underground could safely escape to the surface without suffocating anyone along the way. The shafts had to be precisely angled. They had to account for air pressure and draft. One mistake, and entire sections could fill with deadly fumes. But they got it right. The system worked. Some areas were clearly meant for livestock. You find stables carved into the rock, complete with feeding troughs and drainage channels for waste. They brought their animals underground with them. Sheep, goats, maybe chickens. Anything they need to sustain themselves for an extended period. The smell must have been overwhelming. But the alternative, leaving valuable livestock on the surface to be stolen or slaughtered, was apparently worse. Then there are the chapels. Small rooms with cruciform floor plans, unmistakably Christian in design. This tells us that by the time early Christians were using Derinkuyu, likely between the 6th and 10th centuries, the city was already ancient. They were renovating, adding their own touches to a structure that predated them by centuries, possibly millennia. One of the most haunting features is the schools. Rooms with stone benches carved along the walls, facing a central area where a teacher would have stood. Children learned to read and write in these spaces. Generations of young people whose entire education took place without ever seeing the sun. What stories did they tell themselves about the world above? Did they dream of the surface, or did underground life become so normal that the idea of open sky seemed strange and frightening? You notice something else as you explore. The city could be sealed into sections. Those massive circular stone doors we mentioned earlier, they're positioned at key junctions throughout the complex. Each door weighs between 500 and 1,000 pounds. They're carved from the same volcanic tuff as everything else, shaped like enormous wheels with a central hole for a wooden axle. The genius is in how they work. The doors can only be moved from one side, the inside. If invaders somehow found an entrance and fought their way into the upper levels, the inhabitants could retreat deeper and seal doors behind them, level by level. An attacking force would be left facing a solid stone barrier that couldn't be moved without specialized equipment. And even if they managed to break through one door, there'd be another waiting below. It's defense in depth, quite literally. But here's where things get strange. The size and sophistication of Derinkuyu suggest it took generations to complete. This wasn't a project finished in a few years. We're talking about decades, possibly centuries of continuous excavation. How do you motivate that kind of sustained effort? You don't carve 18 stories into bedrock on a whim. You don't pass this project down from grandfather to father to son unless you genuinely believe the threat is permanent. Whatever they feared, they expected it to last longer than any single human lifetime. That's not preparation for a war. That's preparation for an era. As you stand in one of the deeper chambers, you try to imagine what it felt like to live here. The silence would be profound. No wind, no rain, no birdsong, just the quiet shuffle of feet on stone and the low murmur of voices echoing through carved corridors. The constant smell of lamp oil and smoke. The particular staleness of air that's traveled through hundreds of feet of rock, and always pressing down on you. The weight of knowing that between you and the sky are layers upon layers of earth and stone. Yet people chose this. Repeatedly. Across centuries. They chose darkness and confinement over whatever waited above. You run your hand along the wall. The surface is surprisingly smooth, almost soft to the touch, despite being solid rock. This is volcanic tuff, and it's the secret to how Derinkuyu was even possible. Without this particular type of stone, the underground city would never have existed. Tuff forms when volcanic ash settles and compresses over millennia. In Cappadocia, ancient eruptions from nearby Mount Erciyes and Mount Hassan covered the landscape in thick layers of this ash. Over time, it hardened into stone, but not the kind of stone you're thinking of. Fresh tuff has an unusual property. It's soft enough to carve with simple tools. Bronze Age people could work it with bronze chisels. Iron Age builders found it even easier. Some accounts describe it as having the consistency of hard cheese when first exposed. You can cut it, shape it, hollow it out with relative ease. But here's the clever part. Once exposed to air, tuff hardens significantly over time. The rooms carved 1,000 years ago are much harder now than they were when first excavated. The stone literally gets stronger with age. This meant ancient builders could carve elaborate chambers relatively quickly, and those chambers would become more durable as centuries passed. It's almost like the rock was cooperating with them. Imagine trying to build Derinkuyu from granite or limestone. You need advanced tools, massive labor forces, and decades just to complete a single level. With tuff, a modest crew with basic chisels could hollow out a room in weeks. This explains how such an enormous project could be sustained across generations without industrial technology. It wasn't easy exactly, but it was possible. You notice the chisel marks as you explore. They're everywhere once you start looking. Parallel grooves in the walls where workers carved away stone in systematic strokes. The marks are so consistent that you can almost see the rhythm they work to, a steady, repetitive motion hour after hour, year after year. Some researchers have estimated that Derinkuyu required the removal of approximately 1 million cubic feet of rock. Think about that volume for a moment. That's roughly equivalent to hollowing out a modern 10-story building, except you're working by lamplight with hand tools and carrying every basketful of debris up narrow staircases to the surface. The debris itself presents an interesting mystery. Where did it all go? 1 million cubic feet of volcanic tuff had to go somewhere. Some was probably used for surface construction, building houses, walls, roads. Some might have been spread across fields or used to fill ravines. But honestly, we don't know. There's no massive pile of tuff debris sitting next to Derinkuyu. Either it was very efficiently repurposed, or centuries of wind and rain had dispersed it so thoroughly that we can't identify it anymore. One of the more peculiar discoveries is that different sections of Derinkuyu show different carving techniques. Some walls are smooth and precise. Others are rougher, more hurried. This suggests multiple construction phases, probably by different cultures. The original builders might have been Phrygians or Hittites, ancient peoples who lived in Anatolia long before Greeks or Romans arrived. Later inhabitants expanded what they found, adding their own chambers and modifications. It's like archaeological layers in reverse. Instead of digging down through time, you're walking through it horizontally. An older room leads to a newer tunnel, leads to an even older storage chamber. The city is a three-dimensional timeline, all jumbled together in the dark. You also notice something about the ceiling heights. They're not uniform. Some passages force you to duck. Others open into rooms with vaulted ceilings 12 feet high. This inconsistency is actually strategic. Low ceilings conserve heat and reduce the volume of air that needs to be ventilated. High ceilings in communal spaces prevent that crushing sense of claustrophobia when dozens of people gather. The builders understood human psychology as well as engineering. One of the more charming details, and yes, there are charming details in an underground fortress, is the variety of architectural features that serve no structural purpose. Decorative arches, carved pilasters, ceiling rosettes. These are aesthetic choices. Someone, at some point, decided that just because they were living underground didn't mean everything had to be purely functional. Beauty mattered, even here, maybe especially here. When your entire world is confined to carved stone, perhaps making that stone pleasant to look at becomes more important, not less. There's also evidence of trial and error. Some chambers have collapsed partially, their ceilings cracked or fallen. These failures taught the builders where the stress points were, how thick a supporting pillar needed to be, how wide a span could safely go without reinforcement. Each mistake, some of which probably cost lives, improved the overall design. By the time they reached the deeper levels, the engineering had become remarkably sophisticated. The stone doors, the ventilation system, the water wells, these are not the work of amateurs figuring things out as they go. These are refined solutions, perfected over generations. And yet, for all their skill, we still don't know exactly who they were. The tuff doesn't preserve organic material well. No wooden tools, no fabric, no written records. Just empty rooms and silent corridors that tell us humans were here, but don't reveal their names. Some archaeologists argue that Derinkuyu's earliest sections date back to the Hittite period, around 1400 BCE. Others think it might be even older, possibly Bronze Age, which would push the date back to 3000 BCE or earlier. Without organic material to carbon date, we're left guessing based on architectural styles and historical context. What we can say with certainty is that by the time Christians arrived and left their chapels, they were moving into a building that was already ancient. Imagine that moment. Early Christian communities fleeing persecution, discovering these vast underground spaces, realizing they'd found sanctuary in something built by forgotten people for forgotten reasons. Did it feel like divine providence? Like the earth itself was offering shelter? As you prepare to descend deeper, you take one last look at the carved walls around you. Somewhere in these chisel marks is the story of who built this place and why. We just haven't learned how to read it yet. You stand before one of the massive stone doors. Even in the lamplight, it's impressive. A circular disc of carved tuff, perhaps 5 feet in diameter and nearly a foot thick. It sits in a groove cut precisely into the tunnel wall, perfectly fitted to roll across the passage and seal it completely. You reach out and touch the edge. The stone is cold and impossibly heavy. This door weighs somewhere between 500 and 1,000 pounds, depending on its size. And yet, it's designed to be moved by a single person. The genius is in the engineering. The door doesn't lift or swing. It rolls sideways on a stone axle through the central hole. Grooves carved into the floor guide its path. One person, pushing with their full body weight, could move it, slowly with great effort, but they could move it. Once in place, the door becomes an impenetrable barrier. The surface that faces the passage is smooth and flat, offering no handholds, no leverage points. An attacker on the other side would face what's essentially a stone wall. They could pound on it with hammers for hours and barely chip the surface. But here's the detail that makes these doors truly unsettling. They only open from one side, the side facing inward deeper into the city. From the outside, there's no mechanism to move them at all. This isn't a door designed to keep people out while allowing residents to come and go freely. This is a door designed to seal people in. Once closed, you're committed. There's no changing your mind, no quick exit if the danger passes sooner than expected. You're locked in the earth until you decide, collectively, as a community, that it's safe to emerge. Imagine the psychology of that moment. The decision to roll the door shut. Families gathering their children. Livestock herded into the deeper chambers. Someone appointed to move the door. Maybe the strongest man, or maybe they took turns, gripping the edge and pushing. The grinding sound of stone on stone as it slides across the passage. The way the lamplight from the outside gets narrower and narrower until it's just a sliver. Then nothing. Complete separation from the surface world. You can find these doors at strategic intervals throughout Derinkuyu. Not every tunnel has one, but the main passages and level transitions do. This created a defensive system with layers. If attackers breached the first level, residents could retreat to the second and seal the door behind them. If the second level fell, they'd retreat to the third, and so on, deeper and deeper, each sealed section buying time and safety. The doors also served another purpose: compartmentalization. If a fire broke out in one section, or if ventilation failed somewhere, or if disease spread through a particular level, doors could isolate the problem. The rest of the city could remain safe. It's crisis management built into the architecture itself. Some of the doors show where patterns that tell stories. Grooves worn smooth by countless openings and closings. Chips along the edges where they scraped against the walls. One door on the third level has what looks like tool marks, someone trying to pry it open from the wrong side. We don't know if that was a later explorer or something more sinister. An attacker who made it that far before being sealed out. Or perhaps a resident who got separated from a group and found themselves on the wrong side when the door closed. That's a nightmare scenario, being trapped in the dark on the wrong side of your own safety. The doors required maintenance, of course. The grooves had to be kept clear of debris. The axle hole needed occasional smoothing. Someone had to test them periodically to ensure they still rolled properly. A door that seized up at the critical moment would be worse than no door at all. There's evidence that some doors were upgraded over time. Older, smaller doors were carved out and replaced with larger, heavier versions. Each generation apparently felt the need to improve the defenses. What does it say about their world that safety was never quite good enough? That each improvement suggested the previous version wasn't quite sufficient? You try to imagine being the person who designed these doors, calculating the weight, the thickness, the diameter needed to completely block a passage, figuring out how to make something this heavy movable by ordinary people, testing prototypes, refining the mechanism. This person, or more likely, these people across generations, were solving complex engineering problems with nothing but hand tools and trial and error. No computer models, no material science textbooks, just observation, intuition, and the high stakes of knowing lives depended on getting it right. Some of the most sophisticated doors are on the deeper levels. They're larger, more precisely fitted, with more complex groove systems. This suggests that the builders expected that if invaders got this far, the final defenses needed to be absolutely impenetrable. The deepest levels were the last resort, the place where you made your stand if everything else failed. One door on the 7th level has a small hole near the top. It's too small for a person to fit through, maybe 6 inches across. but it's been deliberately carved, which means it had a purpose. Archaeologists debate what this hole was for. Some think it was for passing small items between sealed sections, food, water, messages. Others suggest it was for ventilation, allowing airflow even when the door was closed. A few propose it was for reconnaissance, a way to see or hear what was happening on the other side before deciding whether to open the door. We don't know for certain, but that small hole represents something important. Even when sealed in, the residents wanted some connection to what lay beyond. Complete isolation was necessary for safety, but perhaps unbearable for the soul. As you move past this door and deeper into the city, you feel the weight of its presence behind you. Knowing it's there, knowing it could be closed, knowing that once closed, the surface world becomes unreachable. It's a peculiar comfort and a peculiar dread all at once. Safety at the cost of freedom. Protection at the price of imprisonment. The stone doors of Derinkuyu forced a choice that most of us never have to make. How much of the world are you willing to give up to stay alive? You pause in one of the deeper chambers and take a slow breath. The air feels surprisingly fresh, not stale or suffocating the way you'd expect 18 stories underground. There's a subtle movement to it, a barely perceptible current that touches your face. You hold your lamp near the wall and watch the flame. It flickers slightly, leaning in one direction. There's airflow here, even at this depth. This is perhaps the most remarkable engineering achievement of Derinkuyu, the ventilation system. Without it, none of this would be possible. You can seal yourself underground all you want, but without fresh air, you'd suffocate within hours. Especially with 20,000 people, their livestock, and their cooking fires all consuming oxygen in a confined space. The ventilation shafts are carved vertically through the rock, connecting multiple levels to the surface. Some of them plunge the entire depth of the city, over 280 feet straight down. That's like drilling a shaft from the ground floor to the top of a 28-story building, except you're working in reverse, starting at the bottom and carving upward through solid stone. The precision required is staggering. A ventilation shaft needs to be perfectly vertical or nearly so. If it angles too much, airflow becomes turbulent and inefficient. If it's too narrow, it won't move enough air. Too wide, and you've weakened the structural integrity of the rock around it. The builders somehow got it right. They carved shafts ranging from about 3 feet to over 6 feet in diameter. Wide enough for significant airflow, narrow enough to remain stable. And they did this without modern surveying equipment, working by lamplight in conditions where a single miscalculation could mean disaster. How did they ensure the shaft stayed vertical? We don't know for certain, but archaeologists have theories. Weighted plumb lines, probably, dropped from a surface to check alignment as they carved upward. Maybe they used water levels, pools of water that would settle horizontally regardless of the tunnel's angle. Or perhaps they simply developed an intuitive sense for it after generations of practice. Trial and error refined into expertise. The shafts served multiple purposes. Primarily, they brought fresh air down and carried stale air up through natural convection. Warm air rises. Cool air sinks. This creates a constant, gentle circulation even without mechanical fans. But the shafts also doubled as wells in some cases. Water tables in Cappadocia are deep, and by boring down far enough, some ventilation shafts tapped into underground aquifers. This was brilliant multi-purpose engineering, one shaft providing both air and water. You notice small alcoves carved at intervals along some corridors. These are ventilation distribution points, places where air from the main shafts enters the living spaces. The builders understood that fresh air needed to reach every section of the city, not just the chambers directly beneath the shafts. So they carved horizontal channels branching off from the vertical shafts, directing airflow throughout the complex. It's essentially an ancient HVAC system, designed and built with nothing but human labor and stone tools. One of the eeriest features is standing in a deep chamber and feeling the breeze on your face. knowing that the air touching you right now was on the surface minutes ago, that somewhere far above, wind is blowing across the Cappadocian Plateau, and a portion of that wind is being channeled down through hundreds of feet of rock to where you stand. The system had to account for smoke, too. Cooking fires, oil lamps, possibly even metalworking forges, all producing smoke that needed to be vented away. The kitchen areas have dedicated smoke shafts separate from the main ventilation. These shafts are narrower and placed directly above fire pits to capture rising smoke before it could spread through the living areas. It's the same principle as a modern chimney, just carved entirely from stone instead of built from brick. Some of the shafts show soot deposits on their walls, centuries-old stains from smoke that passed through them. You can trace the darkest deposits back to their source. Communal kitchens where meals were prepared for hundreds. But here's what's truly remarkable. The system worked so well that people could live comfortably at the deepest levels. Not just survive, but live without constant awareness of suffocation risk. Historians believe families could spend months underground during times of danger. Months of breathing, cooking, burning lamps, all without depleting the oxygen or being overcome by carbon dioxide. The engineering margin for error was razor thin. Too little airflow, and people would sicken. Too much, and the temperature would drop dangerously in winter. The builders had to balance these factors without thermometers, oxygen sensors, or fluid dynamics equations. They did it through observation and adjustment across generations. What worked was kept. What failed was redesigned. Each iteration brought them closer to a system that could sustain life indefinitely below ground. There's also a defensive aspect to the ventilation shafts. In theory, an attacker could try to poison the air supply by dropping something toxic down a shaft from the surface. But the shafts are deep and narrow enough that most substances would disperse before reaching the inhabited levels. And the shafts emerge at various points across the landscape, making it nearly impossible to simultaneously block or poison all of them. Some shaft openings were disguised or hidden among surface structures. An invader walking across the plateau might not even realize they were standing above a ventilation point. This camouflage was intentional, another layer of defense built into the design. You stand beneath one of the main shafts and look up. Your lamplight doesn't reach far into the darkness above. It's like staring into a stone throat that swallows your light and offers nothing back but the whisper of moving air. Somewhere far above, that shaft opens to the sky. Bird might fly past it. Rain might fall into it during storms. Snow in winter. Desert heat in summer. All of it reaching down, connecting this buried world to the one overhead. The ventilation system is why Derinkuyu isn't just a cave where people hid temporarily. It's why this became a place where life could continue, where children could be born, grow up, and possibly never see the sun during their entire childhood. The air from the deep kept them alive. Silent, invisible, essential, like breath itself, noticed only when it stops. You descend another level and hear something unexpected. Water. The quiet drip and echo of water moving through stone. In a city carved entirely from rock, this sound feels almost out of place, organic, alive. You follow the sound to one of the wells. It's a narrow shaft, much like the ventilation shafts, but this one plunges even deeper. Some of Derinkuyu's wells reach down over 180 feet, boring through layer after layer of volcanic tuff until they hit the water table. The well opening is small, maybe 2 feet across, and surrounded by smooth stone worn down by countless hands drawing water over centuries. You lean over and drop a small pebble. You count the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Finally, a distant splash. That's how deep the water is. And here's what makes these wells extraordinary. They're almost impossible to poison from the surface. This was crucial. This was survival. During a siege, one of the most common tactics was to contaminate the enemy's water supply. Dump animal carcasses into wells. Pour in toxins. make the water undrinkable, force your enemy to choose between dying of thirst or dying of disease. But Derinkuyu's wells were designed to resist this threat. The openings at the surface, if they were even accessible at all, were narrow, hidden, and led down through such depth and distance that most contaminants will be filtered or diluted long before reaching the actual water. Some wells had no surface opening at all. They were bored entirely from below, breaking through to underground aquifers without ever connecting to the outside world. These were essentially sealed water sources, known only to the inhabitants. An invading force could search the plateau for days and never find the opening because no opening existed. The water came from below, not from above. Think about the confidence this required, to bore downward through solid rock, not knowing exactly where the water table was. Drilling blind, based on knowledge passed down through generations about where water could be found. And then the moment of breakthrough, when the drill or chisel finally pierces through and water begins to flow. That must have felt like a miracle every single time. The wells served multiple levels simultaneously. Water drawn from the deepest point could be hauled up and distributed throughout the city. Some chambers have carved stone basins fed by channels from the wells, communal water distribution points. Others have smaller personal access points, where individual families could lower their buckets. The stone around the well openings is worn smooth and discolored from centuries of rope friction. Thousands upon thousands of times, someone lowered a bucket, felt it hit water, waited for it to fill, and hauled it back up. The rope grooves cut into the stone are deep, some over an inch. That's not a few years of use. That's generations. Water management was critical for another reason: rationing. During times of siege or extended hiding, the inhabitants needed to make their water last. Archaeological evidence suggests they had clay vessels for storage, large amphorae that could hold days' worth of water per family. This meant they weren't dependent on constant well access. They could draw water during safer hours and store it for use throughout the day. Some historians estimate that with the storage capacity available, Derinkuyu could sustain its population for months on the water from its wells alone. No rivers to cut off, no aqueducts to destroy, no dependence on rainfall or surface streams. The water was deep, protected, and inexhaustible as long as the aquifer held. There's also evidence of water purification knowledge. Some chambers contain what appear to be settling tanks, shallow carved basins where water could sit and allow sediment to drop to the bottom before being transferred to drinking vessels. This suggests they understood that even well water could carry impurities. That clean-looking water wasn't necessarily safe water. One of the more fascinating theories concerns waterborne disease. Early Christian communities using Derinkuyu would have been familiar with illness spreading through contaminated water. They'd seen it happen in surface cities during sieges. The fact that they invested so much effort into deep, isolated wells suggests they had some understanding, even if not scientific, that water from protected sources was safer than water exposed to surface contamination. You notice that the wells are positioned strategically, not randomly placed, but distributed throughout the city to ensure every section had access. No part of Derinkuyu is more than a few chambers away from a water source. This wasn't just convenience. This was emergency planning. If sections became sealed off by the stone doors, each isolated area still had access to water. No group could be cut off and left to die of thirst. The wells also provided a psychological benefit. In a world of stone and darkness, water is proof of life. The sound of it, the taste of it, the cool touch of it on your skin. It's a reminder that even this deep, even this isolated, the earth still provides. You're not completely severed from the natural world. You're just hidden within it. Some wells show signs of ancient repairs. Sections where the shaft wall crumbled and was rebuilt with carefully placed stones. This maintenance was essential. A collapsed well wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. Someone had to go down into these narrow shafts, work by lamplight in cramped conditions, and shore up the walls to prevent further collapse. Dangerous, claustrophobic work that had to be done to keep the city viable. You also notice something else. The water tastes clean. Even today, after centuries of dormancy, Derinkuyu's wells still produce drinkable water. The aquifer they tap into is deep enough, isolated enough, that it remains pure. This is the same water that sustained thousands of people during ancient sieges. The same water drawn by hands that carved these tunnels. It connects you, across vast spans of time, to the people who lived here. You both drink from the same source. As you move away from the well, you hear that dripping sound fade into the background. But knowing it's there, knowing the water is there, changes how this place feels. It's not just a tomb of stone. It's a living system. Even now, water flows, air moves, the earth provides. And perhaps that's the deepest magic of Derinkuyu. It's not about conquering nature or defying it. It's about working with what the earth offers and transforming it into sanctuary. You settle into one of the family chambers and try to imagine what daily life was actually like here. Not the dramatic moments, the sealing of doors, the threat of invasion. Just ordinary life. Waking up, eating meals, talking with neighbors. All of it happening without sunlight. The first thing you'd notice is the temperature. Underground, Derinkuyu maintains a constant 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Cool in summer, warmer than the frozen Anatolian winter. Comfortable, actually, once you adjust. No need for heavy heating or cooling. The earth itself regulates everything. But you would need layers. Maybe a wool cloak, something to keep your body heat close. The lamp would help with that too. Not just light, but a small source of warmth in your immediate space. Sleep would come differently down here. No sunrise to wake you. No rooster crow. No natural light creeping through windows. Your body would lose its connection to the solar rhythm. Some families probably kept rough time by counting meals or taking turns with watch duties. Others might have simply slept when tired and woke when rested, letting their internal clocks adjust to this timeless existence. Children born underground would have no frame of reference for day or night. Their entire world would be lamplight and shadow. The concept of daytime would be something parents described, an abstract idea about a world above where a bright thing in the sky made everything visible. Would those children believe it? Would it sound like a fairy tale? The communal kitchens would be social centers. You can picture families gathering, not just to cook, but to talk, to share news, to maintain connection. Food preparation becomes ritual when it's one of the few varying activities in your day. Bread baking, wine making, preserving whatever food was brought down before the ceiling. The smell of cooking would fill the chambers. Probably a welcome relief from the constant scent of stone and lamp oil. Meals would be simple. Preserved foods mostly. Dry grains, salted meats, stored vegetables. Whatever could last months without refrigeration. The wine press tells us they made wine, which served dual purposes, drink and social lubricant. A way to make stored water more palatable and, perhaps, a way to make underground life more bearable. There's evidence of livestock areas, which means fresh milk, cheese, possibly eggs. The animals would provide not just food, but comfort. Other living things, warm bodies, familiar sounds. Though managing animal waste in a confined underground space must have been a constant challenge. Those drainage channels weren't optional. They were essential for sanitation. The churches and chapels suggest spiritual life continued underground. Prayer, services, quiet meditation in spaces carved specifically for connecting with the divine. Perhaps this made sense to them, seeking God in the depths of the earth. After all, if you believe God is everywhere, then God is here too, in the darkness. Maybe even especially here, where there's nothing to distract from prayer. The schools intrigue historians most. Education continuing in exile. Parents insisting their children learn to read, even when the world above was too dangerous to inhabit. What texts do they study? Religious scriptures, certainly, for the Christian inhabitants, but also practical knowledge, how to maintain the city, how the ventilation works, where the water comes from. Each generation needed to understand the systems keeping them alive. You notice how voices carry in these spaces. The stone walls create echoes. A conversation 3 chambers away drifts to you as murmurs. Privacy would be scarce. Everyone would know everyone else's business. Arguments, laughter, crying children, all of it shared. This could be maddening, or it could be comforting. You're never truly alone. Your community surrounds you, always present, always close. There's evidence of craft work happening underground. Stone carving, obviously, they constantly modified and improved the city. But also textile work, tool repair, small-scale metalworking in chambers with good ventilation. People needed to stay occupied. Idle hands and idle minds would make the confinement unbearable. So they worked. They created. They maintained. Some chambers show evidence of social stratification. Larger, more elaborate rooms versus smaller, simpler ones. Even in refuge, human hierarchies persisted. Leaders or wealthy families claimed better spaces. Others made do with less. Though perhaps underground, such distinctions mattered less than on the surface. When you're all hiding from the same threat, social class becomes temporarily irrelevant. You're all just humans trying to survive. Music must have been important. No instruments survive, wood and skin decay, but the acoustics in some chambers are too good to be accidental. Someone singing in the chapel would fill the space beautifully. A flute or drum in the communal halls would carry through multiple chambers. Music to mark time, to lift spirits, to remind people of beauty even in darkness. The bathrooms, yes, there are bathrooms, show surprising sophistication. Carved stone seats over drainage channels that carried waste away to collection points far from living areas. Not comfortable by modern standards, but functional and relatively hygienic given the constraints. The fact that they bothered with this level of sanitation shows they planned for long-term habitation. This wasn't a desperate hole to hide in for a few days. This was a parallel society, underground. You wonder about the psychological toll. Some people would adapt, find peace in the routine, safety in the stone walls. Others would struggle, feel the weight pressing down, the darkness creeping in. Did they have terms for it? Underground madness? Cave fever? But did they simply accept it as the price of survival and push through? There must have been moments of crisis. Illness spreading through the close quarters. Supplies running low. Conflicts escalating with no way to separate the parties. The stone doors that protected them also trapped them. With each other, with their fears, with their diminishing hope that the surface would ever be safe again. But there were also moments of joy, surely. Births, weddings, quiet evenings with family, stories told by lamplight. The small victories of daily life that persist regardless of circumstances. As you sit in this ancient chamber, you realize that's what Derinkuyu really is. Not just an engineering marvel or a historical curiosity. It's a testament to human adaptability, to our ability to create home anywhere, to build community under impossible conditions, to find light even in the deepest darkness. You climb back toward the upper levels and pause near one of the stone doors. The question returns, insistent and unsettling. What were they hiding from? What threat could be so terrible that this, all of this, was a reasonable response? We don't have a definitive answer. We have theories, educated guesses, historical context that makes certain explanations plausible. But no ancient text says, we built Derinkuyu because of X. No inscription at the entrance explains the founding purpose. Just silence and stone. The most common theory points to invasion. Anatolia, the region we now call Turkey, has been invaded countless times throughout history. It sits at the crossroads of continents, a bridge between east and west. Everyone wanted to control it. Everyone marched armies through it. The Persians came, then the Greeks under Alexander, then the Romans. Later, Arab raiders swept north from the Mediterranean, conducting campaigns that terrorized settled populations. For the people living in Cappadocia, invasion wasn't an abstract possibility. It was a recurring reality. Armies would appear on the horizon. Villages would be burned, crops destroyed, women and children taken as slaves, men killed or conscripted. The pattern repeated across centuries. So you dig. You create a place where armies can't reach you, where you can seal yourself away until the danger passes. This makes sense. It's logical. It's historically defensible. But here's what troubles historians: the scale. Derinkuyu isn't a quick hiding spot. It's not a cellar you duck into during a raid. It's an entire city elaborately planned, capable of sustaining thousands for months. You don't build this in response to occasional raids. You build this because you expect the danger to be persistent, long-term, maybe even permanent. Another theory focuses on religious persecution. Early Christians in the Roman Empire faced waves of violent suppression. Emperors like Diocletian launched systematic campaigns to eradicate Christianity. Christians were hunted, arrested, executed in public spectacles. Cappadocia became a refuge for these communities. The region was remote enough, mountainous enough, that imperial forces couldn't easily control every village. And if you had underground cities, even better, you could worship in secret, maintain your faith without compromise, wait out the persecution until emperors changed or policies shifted. The Christian chapels throughout Derinkuyu support this theory. Crosses carved into walls, baptismal fonts, spaces designed for communal worship. These people were definitely Christian, and they definitely used Derinkuyu during dangerous times. But again, the city predates Christianity by centuries, possibly millennia. The Christians were adapting something already ancient. They didn't build Derinkuyu, they inherited it. So what motivated the original builders? Some researchers suggest natural disasters. Cappadocia sits in a seismically active zone. Earthquakes happen. Maybe the underground cities were earthquake shelters, places where the population could retreat when the earth began shaking. But this doesn't quite fit either. Earthquakes are brief. Minutes, maybe hours at most. You don't need 18 stories of underground rooms with wine presses and schools for an earthquake. You need a reinforced basement, not a subterranean metropolis. Others have proposed climate events: extreme cold, volcanic eruptions blocking the sun, extended droughts. In these scenarios, moving underground offers temperature stability and protection from harsh surface conditions. The constant 55 to 60 degrees would be survivable when surface temperatures became deadly. This is more plausible. Actually, a prolonged climate disaster, say a volcanic winter lasting years, would justify the elaborate preparations. But we have no geological evidence of such an event coinciding with Derinkuyu's construction. Then there are the fringe theories. Some propose the cities were built to hide from aerial attacks, suggesting ancient warfare more sophisticated than we acknowledge. Others point to mythological accounts of people from the sky and suggest Derinkuyu was protection against non-human threats. These theories are not taken seriously by mainstream archaeology, but they persist because the mundane explanations feel insufficient. Invasion? Build a fort. Persecution? Flee to the mountains. Natural disasters? Rebuild elsewhere. Why go underground to this extent unless the threat was something truly extraordinary? Perhaps the truth is simpler and darker: cumulative trauma. Imagine living in a region that's been invaded dozens of times over centuries, where your grandparents' generation was slaughtered, your parents' generation enslaved, where safety is temporary and danger is the default. Eventually, you stop thinking about surviving the next invasion. You start thinking about surviving all future invasions. You build not for the war you can see coming, but for the endless war that never really stops. Derinkuyu becomes less about a specific threat and more about a worldview. The belief that the surface world is fundamentally unsafe. that peace is an illusion and violence is inevitable, that the only true security is to remove yourself from the board entirely, to become invisible, unreachable, underground. This psychological interpretation makes Derinkuyu even more haunting. It's not just engineering, it's resignation. A civilization giving up on the possibility of lasting surface peace, accepting that their future lies beneath the earth, in darkness, sealed away from a world that will never stop being dangerous. You run your hand along the stone door again, feeling the weight of it, the finality of it. This door wasn't built to keep out a particular army or a specific emperor. It was built to keep out everything, to create a boundary between those inside and a hostile world outside. And that boundary worked. Derinkuyu protected its inhabitants across centuries through the rise and fall of empires. But at what cost? What does it do to a culture to live this way? To teach children that safety means darkness, confinement, separation? To pass down, generation after generation, the belief that the world above is the enemy? We don't know. The people of Derinkuyu left no journals, no psychological records, just empty rooms and the tools of survival. But standing here, in this space they carve from fear, you feel it. The weight of a terror so profound it moved mountains. Or rather, moved people to move mountains, to hollow them out and hide inside. You examine the historical timeline, trying to match Derinkuyu's use with specific empires and invasions. The archaeological evidence gives us fragments, clues, but not a complete picture. What we know for certain is that Cappadocia has been conquered repeatedly. Each wave of conquerors left their mark, sometimes literally, in the form of pottery styles, architectural additions, or burial practices that archaeologists can identify. The earliest possible builders might have been the Hittites. This ancient civilization dominated Anatolia from roughly 1600 to 1200 BCE. They were sophisticated engineers, known for their fortifications and water management systems. Building underground cities would have been within their capabilities. Some historians point to Hittite texts that mention underground fortresses in the region, but the texts are vague. They don't name Derinkuyu specifically. And the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1200 BCE during the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious period when civilizations across the Mediterranean suddenly fell apart. If the Hittites built Derinkuyu, who were they hiding from during their height of power? Or was the city built during their collapse, as their world disintegrated around them? After the Hittites came the Phrygians. They controlled Anatolia from roughly 1200 to 700 BCE. Less is known about them, but they were there. They left pottery and burial sites. Could they have been the builders or early expanders of Derinkuyu? Then the Persians arrived. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire swept through Anatolia in the 6th century BCE. This is where we get more concrete historical connections. The Persians practiced Zoroastrianism and had complex relationships with the various peoples they conquered. Some communities were allowed to keep their customs. Others were suppressed. Local populations that resisted Persian rule would have needed hiding places. Derinkuyu would have been perfect, a way to disappear when Persian soldiers came through. But here's the interesting part. The Persians were generally tolerant rulers by ancient standards. They weren't conducting genocides or mass enslavements in Cappadocia. So why would you need such elaborate underground refuge from them? Unless it wasn't about the Persians specifically, but about the instability they represented. When empires change hands, the transition period is dangerous. Old power structures collapse. New ones haven't solidified yet. Bandits thrive. Local warlords emerge. Violence becomes endemic. Underground cities make sense during these transition periods, not hiding from the empire itself, but from the chaos between empires. Alexander the Great conquered the region in 334 BCE. Then his empire fragmented after his death, and Anatolia became a prize fought over by his successors. More instability, more reasons to hide. The Romans eventually took control, incorporating Cappadocia into their empire around 17 CE. Roman rule brought relative peace, the famous Pax Romana. For a while, underground cities might have been less necessary. But then Christianity emerged, and with it a new kind of threat. The Romans persecuted Christians sporadically but viciously. Under Emperor Decius in 250 CE, there was an empire-wide crackdown. Under Diocletian in the early 300s, persecution intensified further. Christians were arrested, tortured, executed. Their property was confiscated. Their churches destroyed. This is when Derinkuyu's chapels likely date from, the 4th to 10th century CE. Christian communities fleeing persecution found these ancient underground cities and recognized them for what they were: salvation. They moved in, carved crosses into the walls, added their own modifications. They weren't the original builders, but they were perhaps the most documented users. We have written records of Christian communities in Cappadocia during this period. We know they hid. We know they suffered. Derinkuyu and the other underground cities kept them alive. Then came the Arab-Byzantine Wars, starting in the 7th century. Arab armies raided deep into Anatolia, seeking to conquer Constantinople. They didn't always succeed at conquest, but they devastated the countryside in the process. Villages burned, population scattered. The Byzantine Empire, trying to hold on to its territory, was often just as destructive. Armies on both sides seized food, conscripted men, and punished communities suspected of collaboration. For the people of Cappadocia, caught between two warring powers, underground was the only neutral ground. You could seal the doors and let the armies fight it out on the surface. When they moved on, whoever won, you could emerge and try to rebuild. Some historians suggest Derinkuyu saw its heaviest use during this period. The 7th through 10th centuries, when the region was a battlefield. The wear patterns on the stone doors, the soot in the ventilation shafts, the evidence of long-term habitation. Much of it dates to this era. But even this doesn't fully explain the city's scale. The Arab raids were seasonal. Armies campaigned during summer and withdrew in winter. You need to hide for months, not years. Yet Derinkuyu is built to sustain indefinite habitation. This brings us back to the unsettling possibility. Maybe it wasn't about any single empire. Maybe it was about all of them. A recognition that empires rise and fall, but Cappadocia remains. And whoever controls the surface, Hittites, Persians, Romans, Arabs, Byzantines, eventually Ottomans, will always bring violence. The specific threat changes. The need for refuge doesn't. So you build something permanent, something that outlasts any individual empire. A parallel civilization that continues regardless of who claims to rule the land above. You notice something as you explore. There are no names of emperors carved anywhere. No declarations of loyalty. No treaties or tributes. The inhabitants of Derinkuyu seem to have divorced themselves from surface politics entirely. They didn't care who won the wars above. They cared only about surviving those wars. This is perhaps the deepest statement Derinkuyu makes about empire. Empires are temporary, and they are all dangerous. The safest response isn't to choose sides. It's to remove yourself from the conflict entirely. To build a world where emperors and armies become irrelevant. Where you control your own survival through stone, water, and air. It's a radical form of withdrawal. Not rebellion. You're not fighting the empire. Not collaboration. You're not helping it. Just absence. Becoming invisible until the current empire exhausts itself and makes room for the next one. As you prepare to descend deeper again, you glance back toward the surface entrance. Somewhere up there, empires are still rising and falling. Armies still marching. Borders still being redrawn. Down here, none of it matters. The stone endures. The water flows. The air circulates. Derinkuyu outlasted them all. You find yourself in one of the family chambers again, but this time you're thinking differently. Not about a few weeks of hiding, not even about a few months. You're thinking about years, decades, lifetimes. because the evidence suggests that some people didn't just hide in Derinkuyu temporarily. They lived here, entire lives from birth to death, without ever seeing the sun. The schools are the first clue. You don't build permanent educational facilities for a short-term emergency. You build them when you expect children to need education over years. When you anticipate raising an entire generation underground. The wear patterns support this too. Stone steps polished smooth by thousands upon thousands of footsteps. Lamp niches blackened by decades of accumulated soot. Grooves in doorways worn deep by hands touching the same spot, day after day, year after year. This is the evidence of habitual life, not temporary refuge. Some historians believe that during the worst periods, perhaps the 7th through 10th centuries, Derinkuyu functioned not as a hiding place, but as a permanent residence. The surface was simply too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much a battlefield. So families made the decision. We stay below until the world above becomes livable again. And for some, that day never came during their lifetime. Try to imagine being born underground. Your first breath is cool, still air. Your first sight is lamplight flickering on pale stone walls. You grow up learning to navigate by touch and memory in dim passages. Your parents tell you stories about something called sky, an impossibly vast open space above your head, about wind that moves freely instead of through carved channels, about rain that falls from above and waters the ground. To a child born in Derinkuyu, these would sound like mythology, like stories about another world that might not even be real. Some children probably didn't believe the surface existed at all, thought their parents were telling fairy tales to comfort them in the darkness. The psychological impact must have been profound. Humans evolved on the surface. We're adapted for sunlight, for seeing distances, for open spaces. Our circadian rhythms depend on day and night cycles. Our mental health is connected to natural light exposure. Take that away for years, and what happens? We don't have journals or medical records from Derinkuyu's inhabitants, but we can guess. Vitamin D deficiency would be inevitable. Bones would weaken. Children might develop rickets. Eyesight would adapt to constant dimness, perhaps improving for low-light conditions, but struggling if they ever emerged into bright sun. Mental health issues would be common. Depression from the darkness and confinement. Anxiety from the constant awareness of being trapped. Cabin fever multiplied by the fact that your cabin is a stone city with limited space and no escape. Yet they endured. Families raised children who grew up, married other people from the underground community, and had children of their own, all beneath the earth. The birth rate in such conditions would be carefully managed. Too many children, and you strain your resources, food, water, space. Too few, and your community doesn't have enough workers to maintain the systems, keeping everyone alive. Someone had to make these decisions. Probably the elders, or whatever governing structure existed, deciding who could have children and when. An intimate violation of personal choice, but necessary for collective survival. The same would be true for deaths. When someone died underground, burial presented challenges. Some chambers show evidence of grave sites, small carved alcoves where bodies were interred. But space was limited. You couldn't have an expanding cemetery. At some point, older graves might have been cleared to make room for new ones. Or perhaps they developed cremation practices, though managing fire and smoke underground would be complex. These are the grim logistics of long-term underground life. The details that don't appear in tourist brochures, but were absolute realities for the inhabitants. You also wonder about the social dynamics. In a normal village, if you have a dispute with your neighbor, you can move away. Find a new community. Start fresh somewhere else. Underground, you're trapped with everyone. The person you hate lives 3 chambers away, and you see them every day at the communal well. Conflict resolution becomes critical. Without effective ways to manage disputes, the entire community could fracture. Maybe this is why the chapels were so important. Not just for worship, but as places to reinforce shared values, to remind everyone that they're in this together and must maintain cooperation. Religious teaching emphasizing forgiveness, patience, and community would be practical survival tools, not just spiritual guidance. Children growing up in this environment would be shaped by it profoundly. They'd learn that safety means confinement, that the outside world is enemy territory. That trust extends only to your immediate community. What happens when those children finally emerge? If they ever do, how do you adjust to a world with horizon lines and weather and strangers? Some probably never could adjust. After years or decades underground, the surface would be alien and terrifying. Too bright, too open, too unpredictable. You might choose to stay below even when it became safe to leave. The darkness would feel more like home than the sunlight ever could. There's evidence that Derinkuyu transitioned in and out of use. Periods of heavy occupation followed by abandonment as surface life became viable again. Then danger would return, and people would descend once more. This cycle could span generations. Your grandparents lived on the surface. Your parents moved underground during the wars. You were born below. The wars end, and your children emerge to reclaim surface life. Except they don't know how to farm in sunlight, don't understand seasonal cycles, fear the open sky. So maybe they stay partially underground, use the surface for crops, but retreat below at night. A hybrid existence, 1 foot in each world. The truly haunting possibility is that for some families, multiple generations passed without surfacing. Great-grandparents who remembered sunlight, passing down stories to grandparents who half believed them, to parents who thought they were myths, to children for whom the underground was simply reality. The only reality they'd ever known or could imagine. When archaeologists first explored Derinkuyu, they found evidence of these long-term inhabitants. Personal items in chambers suggesting permanent residence, not temporary storage. Modifications to rooms indicating people settling in for the long haul. Children's items, small carved toys, stones shaped for simple games. Evidence that childhood happened here, with all its play and learning and growth. Just without sunlight. As you sit in the darkness of this ancient chamber, you feel the weight of those generations. The accumulated years of life lived in stone corridors. The births and deaths, the ordinary days and special occasions, all happening in lamplight. Derinkuyu wasn't just an engineering project. It was home, for longer than anyone expected, for longer than anyone should have to endure. But they did endure, and that might be the most remarkable thing of all. You emerge from Derinkuyu, blinking in the sunlight. But the story doesn't end here, because Derinkuyu isn't alone, not even close. Across the Cappadocia region, archaeologists have discovered over 200 underground cities. 200. Some are small, just a few chambers, enough for a single extended family. Others rival Derinkuyu in scale and complexity. The landscape of Cappadocia is honeycombed with them, like a vast subterranean network invisible from the surface. The second largest is Cappadocia, just a few miles from Derinkuyu. It's slightly smaller, but in some ways more sophisticated. More levels, tighter security, more elaborate ventilation. Cappadocia could shelter about 5,000 people and their livestock. It has all the same features: stone doors, wells, ventilation shafts, communal spaces. But the layout is different. The engineering solutions vary. This suggests Cappadocia was built independently, not as an expansion of Derinkuyu. Two separate communities, both arriving at the same conclusion: we need to go underground. Then there's volcanic, discovered in 1972 by a local farmer. He was curious about where his crop's water was draining and started digging. What he found was another complete underground city, unknown to modern record until that moment. Volcanic has unique features: communication holes between levels that allowed people to talk to each other vertically through the city. A sort of ancient intercom system carved in stone. Derinkuyu and Cappadocia are connected by a tunnel. Not a small passage, but a substantial tunnel stretching for miles underground. Wide enough for people to move through, possibly even to transport goods. This means the cities weren't isolated fortresses. They were networked, part of a larger system. If one city was compromised, inhabitants could retreat through the tunnels to another. If resources ran low in one location, they could be shared from another. It's a redundant safety system on a massive scale. Imagine the engineering required to dig a tunnel several miles long through solid rock, maintaining proper direction and grade, ensuring it connects accurately with the target city, all without GPS or modern surveying equipment. The margin for error would be tiny. Dig at slightly the wrong angle, and you miss your target entirely, wasting years of labor. Yet they did it, successfully, multiple times. Some researchers believe there may be undiscovered tunnels connecting even more cities. A truly vast underground network, most of which remains unmapped. You could potentially travel for dozens of miles entirely beneath the surface, moving from city to city through carved stone corridors. An entire shadow civilization, parallel to the one above. Each city has its own personality, its own unique solutions to the problems of underground life. Some prioritize defense with more stone doors and narrower passages. Others emphasized living space with larger chambers and better ventilation. A few show evidence of specialization. One might have had extensive wine production, another focused on grain storage. This suggests trade between cities, or at least resource sharing. You produce wine, I produce grain, we exchange through the tunnels. The distribution of cities isn't random either. They cluster in areas with the softest tuff, the easiest rock to carve. But they also cluster near ancient trade routes and water sources. Someone was planning this strategically, choosing locations that would be viable both for construction and for long-term survival. What's particularly unsettling is how many cities remain only partially explored. Derinkuyu itself is only about half excavated. The lower levels are still flooded, their contents unknown. Other cities are blocked by collapsed passages or filled with debris from millennia of abandonment. We don't know what's down there. More chambers? Evidence of earlier civilizations? Artifacts that could answer our questions about who built these places and why. Or perhaps just more empty rooms, more silent testimony to fear and survival. Some cities have been lost again after being found, discovered by accident, noted by local officials, then forgotten as the entrance was covered by modern development or agricultural activity. There could be dozens more underground cities beneath houses, roads, and farm fields. Their entrances sealed by time and human activity, waiting for another basement renovation to reveal them. The scale of this network suggests coordination. Multiple communities, possibly across generations, all working toward the same goal. This wasn't individual families digging cellars. This was organized, society-wide preparation for catastrophe. Someone was teaching the knowledge of how to build these cities, passing down the techniques, the engineering principles, the survival strategies. There might have been master builders who traveled from site to site, sharing expertise. Or perhaps each community developed its own methods, and they shared innovations through whatever communication networks existed. The fact that the cities are similar but not identical supports this. There is clearly a shared concept, underground refuge with specific features. But each city adapted the concept to its local conditions and needs. Archaeological digs in some of the smaller cities have revealed surprises. Evidence of metalworking in one, a large scriptorium in another, suggesting a community focused on preserving texts. One city appears to have been primarily a military installation. Minimal living space, but extensive storage for weapons and armor. This diversity suggests the underground network served multiple functions, not just hiding from danger, but sustaining an entire parallel economy and society. Modern Cappadocia has built on top of this hidden world, mostly unaware. People live in houses above chambers that haven't been opened in centuries. Children play in fields where ventilation shafts poke up like stone chimneys. Farmers occasionally find new entrances and usually just fill them back in, not wanting the complication. But every now and then, someone decides to explore, and the underground world reveals another piece of itself. Another city, another tunnel, another fragment of a story we're still trying to understand. The question keeps returning: why so many? If Derinkuyu alone could hold 20,000 people, and Kamakli another 5,000, why build 200 more cities? How large was the population that needed this much refuge? Or was it that the threat was so widespread, so persistent, that every community needed its own underground sanctuary? That nowhere on the surface was safe enough to risk staying? Some historians propose that the cities represented different eras of construction. As one city became unusable, flooded, collapsed, or simply filled to capacity, a new one was started. The timeline of underground habitation might span thousands of years, with different cities active at different times. Others suggest they were all active simultaneously during peak danger periods. That Cappadocia's entire population would descend together, distributing across the network to balance resources. We don't know. What we do know is that beneath the rolling hills and fairy tale rock formations of Cappadocia lies a maze of human engineering. Cities stacked on cities, tunnels connecting to tunnels. A testament to either incredible foresight or incredible fear. Possibly both. As you stand on the surface, looking across the plateau, you realize the ground beneath your feet is not solid. It's hollow, carved out, filled with empty rooms and silent corridors. The earth here is more absence than presence, more void than stone. And somewhere in that void, the answer to why still waits. You stand at the entrance one last time, looking back into the darkness. Derinkuyu has taught you something, though you're not entirely sure what yet. Something about fear, something about survival, something about what humans are capable of when pushed to extremes. Fear, in the abstract, is destructive. It paralyzes. It divides. It makes us small and suspicious. But Derinkuyu represents fear transformed into something else. Not paralysis, but action. Not division, but coordination. Not smallness, but ambition on an impossible scale. The people who built this were terrified, yes. Terrified enough to spend generations carving a city from solid rock. But they didn't let that fear destroy them. They channeled it, organized it, made it productive. Fear became the blueprint for survival. And perhaps that's the first lesson. Fear isn't the problem. What we do with fear, that's what matters. You can let it consume you, or you can let it motivate you. The builders of Derinkuyu chose motivation. They looked at an impossible task, creating a livable city underground, and decided it was less impossible than the alternative. Less impossible than staying on the surface and hoping for mercy from armies and empires that had shown none. There's a kind of desperate optimism in that. A belief that human effort can overcome almost any obstacle. That if you work long enough, plan carefully enough, and commit fully enough, you can create safety where none exists. Derinkuyu also teaches something about community. This wasn't a project for individualists. No single person could dig 18 stories into bedrock. No family could maintain the ventilation shafts or defend the entrances alone. This required cooperation on a massive scale. Strangers working together across generations toward a goal they might never see completed, trusting that their children or grandchildren would benefit from their labor. In our modern world, we've largely lost that generational thinking. We struggle to plan beyond quarterly earnings or election cycles. The idea of starting a project that won't be finished in your lifetime seems almost absurd. But that's how Derinkuyu was built. People planting trees whose shade they'd never enjoy. Carving chambers they'd never live in. Building a future for descendants they'd never meet. There's something profoundly hopeful in that. even amid the fear that motivated it. A belief that tomorrow matters. That survival is worth the effort. You think about the stone doors again. Those massive circular barriers that could only be closed from the inside. They represent a choice to seal yourself away from the world, to prioritize safety over freedom, isolation over risk. It's a trade-off we still grapple with today. How much liberty do we surrender for security? How much connection do we sacrifice to feel safe? The people of Derinkuyu made their choice clear. When danger came, they chose survival. They chose the darkness. But they didn't forget the light. The fact that they eventually emerged, that the cities were eventually abandoned as people returned to surface life, tells you something important. The underground was always meant to be temporary. A refuge, not a permanent home. They endured the darkness because they believed the sun would be safe to see again someday. And eventually it was. The cycles of violence that drove them underground eventually broke. Whether through exhaustion, political change, or simple historical accident, the threats diminished. And people climbed back up, blinking in daylight, ready to try surface life again. That return to the light is perhaps the most hopeful part of the story. Fear drove them down. Hope brought them back up. Derinkuyu also reveals something about human adaptability. We are incredibly flexible creatures. We can live almost anywhere, under almost any conditions, if we must. Underground cities, desert settlements, Arctic camps, space stations. Give us a reason to survive, and we'll find a way. But there's a cost to that adaptability. The children raised underground, never seeing the sun. That's not natural for humans. We paid a price for that survival. We always do. The question is whether the price was worth it. And the answer, apparently, was yes. The communities that used Derinkuyu survived. Their descendants are still here. The threats that seemed permanent and insurmountable eventually passed. History moved on. The underground cities, once essential for survival, became optional, then unnecessary, then forgotten, until a man broke through his basement wall in 1963 and rediscovered what fear had built. Now Derinkuyu is a tourist site. People visit, marvel at the engineering, take photos, and leave. They experience it as history, as archaeology, as a curiosity. But standing here in the darkness, you feel it differently. You feel the weight of the fear that carved these halls, the desperation that made this necessary, the small, persistent hope that kept people going even when their entire world was confined to lamplight and stone. There's a question that haunts you as you prepare to leave. What would drive us underground today? What modern fear is powerful enough to motivate this kind of response? Climate change, perhaps. Nuclear war. Pandemic. Economic collapse. We have our own catalog of terrors, our own reasons to imagine seeking shelter from a dangerous world. Maybe that's why Derinkuyu resonates so strongly now. It's not just ancient history. It's a mirror, showing us what humans do when the world becomes unlivable. We don't give up. We don't despair entirely. We dig. We build. We create alternatives. We survive, even if survival means transforming everything about how we live. As you walk back toward the surface, you notice how the air changes. The slight stuffiness of the deep chambers gives way to fresher currents. You're approaching the outside world. The transition is gradual, almost gentle. And then you're there. Sunlight, wind, the vast open sky. It feels overwhelming after the enclosed darkness. Too bright, too open, too much. You understand just a little why someone raised underground might struggle with this. Might prefer the comfort of stone walls and controlled lamplight. Might feel safer in the depths than under the infinite sky. But you also feel the relief of it. The freedom of movement without walls pressing close. The warmth of sunlight on your skin. The simple miracle of breathing air that hasn't traveled through hundreds of feet of carved stone. You turn back one last time, looking at the entrance. Just a doorway in the hillside. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Inside, the city waits. Silent, empty, patient, ready, if needed, to shelter another generation fleeing another threat. Because that's what Derinkuyu ultimately is, a promise. A promise that when the world becomes too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable, there is still refuge, still safety, even if it means leaving behind everything we think of as normal. Still survival, even in the deepest darkness. The stone endures, the water flows, the air circulates, and somewhere in that simple persistence is the lesson Derinkuyu offers across millennia. Fear is real. Danger is real. Threats are real. But so is human resilience. So is our capacity to adapt, to build, to survive. So is our stubborn, persistent hope that tomorrow might be better than today, even if we have to hide underground and wait for it. You let the silence settle around you now. The story of Derinkuyu complete. The journey through darkness finished. You've walked those ancient corridors, felt the weight of stone overhead, understood just a little what it meant to choose survival over comfort, safety over freedom, darkness over danger. And you've emerged again into light and air and possibility, the way those ancient inhabitants eventually did, the way we all hope to when our own darknesses pass. There's comfort in knowing that Derinkuyu still exists, still waiting in the earth, still functional after all these centuries. A reminder that humans can build things that last, that solutions to impossible problems do exist if we're willing to work for them. That fear doesn't have to destroy us. It can motivate us to create something extraordinary. The underground city taught its builders how to survive, and it teaches us across the vast distance of time that survival is always possible, even when the world seems too dangerous to inhabit, even when the only safe direction is down into the earth itself. Even then, we endure, we adapt, we build, we wait for better days, and eventually, those better days come. The light returns, the doors open, life continues, carrying the memory of darkness, but no longer consumed by it. So rest now, knowing this, that whatever fears you carry, whatever threats seem insurmountable, humans have faced worse, have hidden deeper, have endured longer, and have emerged, eventually, into the light. The stone endures, the water flows, the air circulates, and you, too, will endure. Whatever darkness you're navigating, whatever refuge you seek, it exists. Maybe not carved in rock beneath the earth, but somewhere, in some form. Safety is possible, survival is possible, and when you're ready, emergence is possible too. For now, let yourself rest in this quiet space, this moment between stories, between journeys. Let the weight of the world lift just for now. Let your breathing slow, your thoughts settle. You've traveled deep tonight, through stone and time and human resilience. You've witnessed what fear can build when transformed into purpose. You've learned what our ancestors knew, that the darkness is survivable, that even the deepest hiding eventually ends, that the sun is still there, waiting when we're ready to return to it. So close your eyes now. Let the ancient city fade behind you. Let the stone doors seal, not with fear, but with protection. You're safe here, in this moment, in this breath. The world can wait until morning. For now, you rest, secure in the knowledge that humans have survived worse, that we carry within us the same resilience that carved cities from stone, that we too can endure, can wait, can emerge when the time is right. Sleep comes easy in the depths, where the temperature is constant, the silence profound, where the earth itself holds you. Drift now, like water through ancient wells, like air through carved shafts, like lamplight flickering in the endless dark. You are safe. You are held. The city waits. The earth endures. And you, in this moment, rest. Sweet dreams.